Welcome to the Catholic Midlife podcast, where we're addressing the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. Join us each week as we spark a midlife renewal and create a firm foundation for the next wonderful, exciting, awesome season of life.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Midlife podcast. It is great to be here with you. I am Curtis.
Hi, everyone. It's Karen, and it's February in Minnesota. Yay!
It's a new season.
Yes.
It's a new season for the podcast. It's not spring yet, Karen.
Oh, man. I'm disappointed.
Yeah, exactly. So we got some listener feedback, Karen, on the iTunes. They said, listening to Karen talk about the kingdom of heaven is the new creation of both heaven and earth was so stunning that I listened to this episode 4 times. This episode helped me connect some dots in my understanding of God's creation and the kingdom of God. I'm so grateful for the thoughtful, well-researched information Curtis and Karen present. It refreshes my mind and spirit. Thank you.
Wow, what a beautiful review. Thank you to whoever posted that on iTunes. It's so affirming and encouraging. So thank you.
It truly is. And when we started this podcast, Karen and I looked at each other and we said, this business about the kingdom of heaven, that's really a hill to die on.
Yes.
In terms of bringing that forward and emphasizing how it's a key to so many things in our faith.
Yes. And any listeners, if you haven't heard that episode, it's in our Advent season. So feel free to go back and take a listen.
Yeah. And speaking of hills to die on.
Uh-oh.
When you're thinking about improving your marriage, what's going to be effective?
Yeah.
I think that's a great question because we don't always do the most effective thing. Or we don't always think broadly. And today, we're going to suggest some areas that you could put your energy into in your marriage in midlife.
Wow, Curtis, I just realized something. We're doing the marriage season in February. I mean, even our podcast is directed by Hallmark. How about that? It's kind of crazy, but there you go.
We were not thinking of Valentine's Day when we were planning out this season.
We were not, but there you go. There it is. It comes around anyway. In fact, what I was thinking of was that we've kind of avoided doing a season on marriage so far. We waited till we really felt compelled to do one. Why do you think we avoided that for so long?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons, Karen. We have a lot to say about it, and the work we do actually speaks to it. But when it comes to working directly on your marriage and those relationships are super complex, and there's a lot of good marriage material out there.
Yes, there really is. That's a good point.
And when it comes to just the nuts and bolts of working through big conflicts, I mean, marriages that are struggling, that's its whole own universe.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing I think that kind of bugs me sometimes is I'm not really impressed with, marriage tips. Even the good ones, like take a regular date night. That makes a lot of sense. It's really important. It can be super simplistic when you're thinking about the whole of your relationship and what you're about. So just a list of marriage tips to me, I just feel like it falls short when I'm thinking about putting energy into growing my marriage and deepening it.
Right. So the tips may not really put your energy in that area that could be most effective to grow your marriage.
Exactly. Exactly.
And when you're really struggling, a lot of those tips are just terrible.
Sure. They're not really going to help you. That makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, though, marriages in midlife, if you're married and you're in midlife, you're going to go through significant transition. And this is going to be an issue, right? The dynamics change, the roles change, your identity as mom or dad changes. People retire, and then you have to rethink all the time you're spending together, or, maybe there's new family responsibilities. It's a big area of transition for people.
Yeah, there's a lot of men and women in midlife kind of looking at their partner out of the corner of their eye.
Right.
Going, oh, yeah, how's this going to work? What's needed here?
What's it going to all be like? Yeah.
It's just a little nervous because the kids or whatever, that's been your plan. Your life has been planned for you.
Sure. They can really take all that energy and become the focus. I feel like you were telling me once, Curtis, that there's this pattern of role switching in midlife where, kind of like you're saying, if you're heading into the empty nest and the responsibilities are changing, the women tend to have this pattern of wanting to branch out and become interested in new things and in outside the home accomplishments. Whereas that's when the guys, just to generalize, tend to draw in and want to become more nurturing or work on the marriage and become less status and work oriented.
There is a general pattern. So for the men, their work is starting to wind down, or they've just gotten to a place in life where, okay, this is what it is, and it's not everything anymore.
Right.
I've noticed the kids are moving out and this sort of thing, and I could see my wife and I were going to be together, and they become a lot more interested in nurturing the marriage and become more nurturing. And that's a trend.
Yeah. And that can be a lot to work through.
And for the women, if they're working inside or outside the home as the kids start to move out, this is a big role change for them. It is for the dads too, but it really hits the ladies.
It does. And I feel like the two parties in the marriage, they're going through their own transitions around all that, and their general midlife transitions, and those don't always match up where people are at in terms of what they're going through, right? So different rates of growth and transition and different kinds of things they want to start pursuing, and that could be a lot to work through too.
Well, for the men, when it comes to the women wanting to branch out, step up, step out, occasionally this goes over their head because they're still enmeshed in their work, and they feel like, well, things are moving. We're going along.
Right.
One fellow that was trying to ask me what we do for women, he said, so you're going to help my wife figure out how to reorganize the garage?
Somebody said that?
Yes.
That's hilarious.
And I just tried to gently suggest that, well, she could probably get help from him on that. I'm sure she'd so much appreciate it.
She might have some other goals.
There might be some larger goals and ambitions that she's been sitting on.
So really, we're talking about this because if you're in midlife and you're married, this is an important issue for you, and it's a key moment in your marriage to bring the energy for new growth so that you can blossom into the next half of your marriage. And let's face it, you could have a lot of beautiful marriage years left.
Blossom. Let's focus on that. It's a time for the marriage to blossom.
Okay, that's a good word.
And
let's stick on that.
Plants in the garden are blossoming. It takes energy to get that blossom out there. John Gottman, who's sort of a researcher that needs no introduction in the marriage world, he says he thinks that the laws of entropy apply to marriage. So the second law of thermodynamics, it says all closed systems descend from order into chaos unless energy is put into the system to create order. So your bedroom will become a disaster area unless you put energy into cleaning it up once in a while.
That's what's needed. Thank you.
It needs some energy to create the order. And marriages will typically wind down and get worse if we're not putting energy in them to make them grow.
Okay. That's a great analogy. I really like that. So really, what we're talking about here is how to put some energy into your midlife marriage so it will keep growing and blossoming into the next season of life.
Well, and growing is a central idea here because so often we think about the things that we're going to do. Oh, I'm going to spend more time with my spouse. So we're going to have common interests. We're going to have more date nights, whatever it is. These are all positive. However, the question of growth, I think, is central. So let's talk about some of these bigger areas that we want to have in mind as we think about, ooh, what am I going to do now?
Right. Yeah. It can be helpful to get a little higher level with things. So actually, to that end, we've created our own little list of things that will serve your midlife marriage and its future if you choose to invest in them. They're great places to put your energy. In fact, I hesitate to say this, but we've even made an acronym. Okay. And I really normally hate acronyms. So if you don't remember anything about the acronym, don't feel bad. Usually I can come up with the word and then I have no idea what the letters were supposed to stand for. So here we go. We actually have an acronym. If you want to keep your marriage sharp, SHARP, this is the acronym for you. Do you want to start us off, Curtis?
Way to go, Karen. Way to embrace the acronym. So S is for sharp. Oh, I just did it wrong. S is for creating a shared vision.
Shared vision. Yay. Ding, ding, ding.
So, I mean, you want to intentionally consider what your vision is for your life moving together forward. Maybe not just what you want to do, but who you want to be together. What characteristics you want to be true of you.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about this in our goal setting season in terms of the individual, that you want to think globally about who is it I really want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? And it's a great question also for a marriage. What are the characteristics of our marriage? What kind of marriage do we want to have? And who do we want to be together? There was this one couple and they were looking at the scripture from 2 Timothy 4. I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I have kept the faith. And that really resonated with them. And they asked themselves, okay, when we've, quote, finished the race, what do we want our marriage to look like? So they sat down and said, okay, when we've been married for 50 years, what is the list of things we want to be true about themselves and our relationship and our marriage? And it was really insightful. It was things like, we want to be people who laugh together, or we want to be people who are always growing intellectually and thinking about things together. So it was a little higher level about what does this look like for us in our unique situation.
That's brilliant, and that's an inspiring example, Karen. I noticed that they're using fighting the good fight.
Yeah.
It's kind of that striving language. I'm realizing that striving is not always the most direct path to certain kinds of growth.
Yeah.
That's why I'm really running with the growth analogy. So vines and branches, anybody?
Yeah.
Growth.
Yeah.
Growth and communion.
That's a good point.
Unity.
So what image is really capturing here what we're talking about? Oh man, I'm going to have to think of a new acronym. It's SHARP. Here is the sharp, pointy sword of your marriage. Poke, 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 poke. It's not quite what you're trying to get at here.
The pokey stick.
Yeah. Okay. Look later, like maybe in a year, for a different acronym. Right now, this is draft number 1.
You've got acronym remorse.
I knew I would. I knew I would. Yes.
Shared vision. So it's a little intimidating to think of mission statements and shared visions. However, you can always get started and try something, and it'll create some focus. One way I like to think about making a vision is telling a story. So story is pretty important in our life. We're storytelling animals.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, the story we tell about ourselves can be very, I guess, controlling or inspiring.
Right.
Or all of the above. So, for instance, if we complain a lot, all of a sudden that can start to be our story. That's who we are. We're limited by all these sorts of things.
Interesting. So almost you could say, okay, if we imagine ourselves, celebrating 50 years of marriage, at that point, what's the story we want to be telling ourselves about our life together?
It's just another way to think about vision.
Yeah.
We don't have to be super left brain and procedural necessarily. There's a lot of ways to do this. And so this episode is about higher level concepts and where to put the energy in. So creating a vision, I think, is incredibly useful.
Yeah. I like that story element. Okay. So S is for shared vision. H is for healing the past. Healing the past. There is no marriage without disappointments, hurts, wounds, things to forgive one another for. And for sure, we don't want to ruminate on them. And we do want to heal the past and give it the attention it needs so we can move freely into our vision and our story for the future.
Move freely into the future. That's right. The past can start to control us. And if we have the disappointments and hurts and everything else, those are a big influence on us and start to lock down our vision.
Yeah. And I think letting go of the past can really take a lot of different forms. That couple that made the vision list, they ended up making this other list, and they kind of called it things that we will never do and can never change. And it's one way of dealing with the past, because there are a whole lot of things that at this point in life, we're not going to change or we're not going to do. Like they said, okay, we are never going to build that cabin in the woods with our teenage boys, because now they're in their 20s and they're married, and we're going to let go of that. We're going to accept that. And we're going to accept, guess what? We never had a daughter. And that's just something to accept and move on. And there's things about ourselves and our life together that we just aren't going to change. And I think on their list was something like, we're never going to declutter the house. And once they said that, it was like, okay, we're just not going to. And we can put our energy into the other things we want freely moving forward. So that's one way, I think, of letting go of the past. And then sometimes there are actual wounds that require forgiveness, reconciliation, rebuilding of trust in order to move forward and continue to grow together.
The area of healing and forgiveness, it's a big area.
Yeah.
Sometimes it might take a lot of work to start to move into those areas that are sensitive. Some things are pretty minor and we can just forget about them, I think, and it's up to the individual just to let go of them, get over it. But if there's things that really are hard, that continue to bug you, then those could be a candidate for forgiveness or for asking for forgiveness.
Curtis, I feel like these are conversations that are really hard to have and that we tend not to seek or to bring up. And there can be a real benefit in this period of life, to having an awareness and an attentiveness to when there's things that are coming up for us that really it's the time. It's the time to allow them to be healed and to move forward. So kind of an encouragement, I think here, all we're saying is be attentive to this area. Consider the healing that God could bring to each of you in your marriage in this transitional season, and how beautiful and blossoming that could be.
Sometimes in this bucket of healing, there are these wounds, and we can feel that we've just given up on a certain area. And
right.
There's the wound factor, but there's also, it can block us from doing certain things. So if my spouse is never going to talk to me in a deep level the way I really want, then maybe I've just started to tolerating a certain amount of disconnection. Now, it's one thing to accept that one person's a cat and one person's a dog.
Yeah.
And the cat wants more distance, but at the same time, to just give up on intimacy that's a huge problem.
Well, that really makes me, it's just very insightful. It's making me think that there's kind of a tension here, and it's really a beautiful tension. And there's a lot of personal discernment in it. Is what are the things that I really need to accept? This is not going to change. But also all of these areas where there's a lot of hope, because there's a lot of possibility for change at this time in life. We haven't settled into some kind of a permanent way of being. There's all sorts of possibility for change. And in these other instances, as you're saying, maybe shifting towards a little more hope is more appropriate.
Karen, reach for the hope. That is great suggestion. It is not that unusual to hear married couples say, I feel like we're roommates. I feel like we're living separate lives. There's a lot more struggling marriages out there than most of us realize, perhaps, depending on, what kind of bubble we live in. Giving up hope is always, that's the end of the line. We just encourage people to think about what might be possible.
Yeah, exactly. And even in a marriage where we might not say the marriage is struggling, there will be areas or pockets of struggle, and there's hope for those as well.
Everyone has areas of struggle.
Everyone does.
Yes.
So S for shared vision, H for healing the past. What is A for?
A, attend to the bond.
The bond, attend to the bond.
Bond, marriage bond. 007. License to kill. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill that woman.
License to kill. License to thrill, maybe?
License to grow.
License to grow. I love that.
The bond. Tell us about the bond.
Well, the bond, this actually comes from a couple that we like and that we're going to interview next week on the podcast, Phil and Michelle Carlson. And in their Connected Marriage course, they have this nice way of talking about the marriage bond as like the third person in the marriage. So it's you, it's me, and it's the bond. And the bond is its own thing that we're cultivating and feeding and building and strengthening throughout the marriage. It's like
really
its own thing.
This idea of creating perspective. So I can think a lot about what I want. I can think a lot about what she wants. But then thinking about, what does the marriage bond want? That's creating a new perspective for me.
Well, it gives a slight bit of objectivity to step back and say, okay, how's my bond doing? How's our bond doing? And what are the things we're doing that are building the bond? And is there anything that any of us are doing that are tearing it down or weakening the bond? And it just puts things in a little different light. The research really shows that people in the second half of marriage, they want a deeper, more personal bond. They want a stronger relationship. It's important.
Things in the bond, those would include intimacy, trust, companionship, depth of the relationship, all these sorts of glue that holds us together, sort of like the protons and the neutrons, they're held together by these atomic forces. So vulnerability, connection, mutual support, these are the kinds of things that it would be great to check in with and think about what kind of energy you can put into them to build them up, to build the bond.
Right. So that very well may be something like date night. And it also may be something else in your personal situation that needs a little more attention and infusion of energy. I wonder if this is even another way to ask that question about when we're married 50 years is, what do we want our bond to be like? What do we want that to look like at that time? And that could give a lot of insight as well.
Yeah, questions around the marriage bond. I think that's just a really nice way of getting at some of these categories that we don't always think about when we have the ambition to make our marriage better. Now, R in SHARP is for relationships. It's the R word. And we are always working on relationship skills. We can always grow, and then there's all the patterns between the people in the marriage. Communication, validation, resolving conflict, and just, how deeply we communicate on a daily or weekly basis.
Right. So the bond is kind of like the strength of the connection and the elements of the connection. And I think the R is about the relational skills that we're always developing and trying to get better at, and things that will serve our relationship in the end. And one thing that's coming to mind for me, Curtis, is when we were just always learning about this stuff. We were sitting in that training and they started to talk about how some people are literal speakers, right? And some people are inferential speakers.
And some people are literal listeners. Some are inferential listeners.
Yeah. So they said that. We just looked at each other and we started cracking up. It was so hilarious because, well, it was obvious to us who was the literal speaker and listener and who was the inferential.
Karen is such a literal listener.
So literal.
You've got to spell out all the little details for her. Otherwise, she'll look at you and start asking you all these questions.
Yeah. Like, well, what are you really saying here? Well, what do you really mean?
Are you questioning my speech?
Yeah. And every time I'm like, gee, I just don't have such and such in the refrigerator. Curtis is like, oh, you want me to go to the store for you, right? Well, no, I didn't really say that. So we just have really enjoyed that insight and getting to learn a little bit more about the skill of interacting as literal and inferential speakers and listeners.
So skill is a good word. It's fascinating how much we've learned about all these relationship skills as we've motored through all these trainings and materials.
Sure. And we've learned them in parenting too, and been able to apply them to marriage. So having kind of an ongoing skill building awareness can be really great. Even just having an eagerness to learn a new skill that's going to either lessen conflict or increase the bond or create a new dynamic in your marriage. It's really great to pay attention to that.
what if it made your life easier?
Ooh. Okay, I'm sold. I'm motivated now.
Had a better relation skill in some area, it might make your life easier. All of a sudden you understand what's called for in a situation.
Right. Exactly. So S for shared vision, H for healing the past, A for attend to the bond, R for relationship skills, and P is what, Curtis?
Personal and spiritual growth.
Personal and spiritual growth. Tell me about that.
Well, you're creating your life together. So, Karen, I think it's really important that you have to be creating a life for yourself in order to bring that to the relationship. In a relationship, you want the other person to bring something to the party. You want to bring something to the party yourself. And the spirits and the energy, the lives of the individuals start to feed off each other.
I've really experienced that, Curtis. Like if you are having a time of deeper personal or spiritual growth, it really does bring this burst of energy, and it's inspiring and motivating to me. It just kind of pulls me in and becomes contagious. And so you're focusing on yourself actually has this really great effect on our marriage.
In life, we're usually growing or we're going backwards.
Yeah.
So growing is indispensable in life. And we're gregarious creatures. When we're together, we kind of feed off of each other's energy. We experience that all the time. When we're with a really high energy person, it
so true.
Rubs off on us, and it encourages us, and vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like the question that you've asked a lot of times in different contexts in our marriage, Curtis, which is, are we spiraling up or are we spiraling down? Are we spiraling up or spiraling down? It just kind of snaps me into awareness to look at kind of what's going on and what's needed.
Another point about personal and spiritual growth, Karen, is that some of that personal growth, it's going to take some pressure off the marriage. Our marriage can't do everything for us.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I've heard this, and I can't remember which marriage expert said it, but something like, if you want to improve your marriage, focus on your own growth. And it's going to have an impact on the rest of the environment.
That's right.
Okay. So just to summarize, keeping your marriage sharp and pokey, stay tuned for a different acronym. It's shared vision, attend to the bond.
Relationship.
Ooh, thank you. Well, healing the past, attend to the bond. See, I can't even get my own acronym right. Relationship skills and personal and spiritual growth. There you go. I did it.
Way to go. That was brilliant.
Thanks.
That was brilliant. Thinking about entropy.
Yeah.
If we're not putting energy into the marriage, then likely entropy is going to have its way with your marriage. And if we can have some of these broader areas, some of that we've mentioned, or something else that's we can put energy into that's going to help the marriage grow, I think. It comes down to having an ethic of choosing to grow your marriage.
All right. An ethic of growth. I like that. Recently, considering our ethic of growth, we did a beautiful course called Connected Marriage. And next week, we'll be talking to the founders of Connected Marriage. It really added some great energy to our marriage, and we learned a lot. So join us for that.
We really did. And we encourage listeners that haven't joined our Facebook group to go to Facebook and search for the Catholic Midlife Podcast and join up. And we would love to see you there.
We would.
Thank you so much for listening to the Catholic Midlife Podcast. It's great to be here with you. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite app or platform. Leave a review that's so helpful so that others like you can find the podcast. and be sure to tell your friends. We'll see you next week.